Thank you for the introduction. Today, we are commemorating the 75th anniversary of Turing's paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. You know who I am. I'm Jose Hernandez Orallo, and this is a privilege of conducting an exceptional fireside chat with Professor Geoff Hinton. We will cover a series of themes on the prospects of superintelligence, even if many people don't like this word, but the AGI word is even worse, for about 40 minutes. And then we will give the floor to the audience, to you, for questions. So a little bit of introduction, but even if he doesn't need it. So Geoff Hinton graduated in experimental psychology here at King's College, Cambridge, and did his PhD in artificial intelligence in Edinburgh. Then he held several academic positions in the UK, the US, including a part-time position at Google, and finally in Toronto, where he has spent a great part of his career. He is now University Professor Emeritus there. His contributions and perseverance have taken the field of machine learning to the prominent place where it is today. He's associated with propagation, with solving ImageNet, with Boltzmann machines, and so many other great ideas and achievements. Yet I'm surprised that by the impact of an idea or the idea of using backpropagation for learning word embeddings. There are so many papers today trying to get rid of word embeddings in LLMs, but still we are using these embeddings as a first stage of these models. He has received so many accolades that we will lose precious time enumerating them. As everybody knows, he's a Turing Prize winner, which was considered the Nobel Prize for Computing. And I was very proud of that. We had the Nobel Prize for Computing. Until last year, he received the Nobel Prize in Physics for foundational discoveries and inventions that enable machine learning with artificial neural networks. Let's give a warm welcome to Professor Geoff Hinton. You should see him.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. Welcome.
maybe they can put my picture up.
There's no need. We have the real you. So, okay. So I said we are commemorating 75 years of the Imitation game, but it's been almost the same time for Samuel Beckett's play, An Attendant Godot, a tragicomedy in 2 acts. Waiting for Godot for 75 years, we have been Pozzo shouting, "Think," to Lucky, but only getting a monologue of gibberish. So, Geoff, how many times did you shout "think" to your neural nets? How many years waiting for backpropagation to work so well? These are rhetorical questions. So, finally, the waiting is over. Turing's goal seems to be achieved. The formerly incredulous society of 1950s is now talking about machines that can be intelligent or even outsmart people. So it's now high time to revisit the question, not whether machines can think, but the Gallup poll one. And this is the first question to you, Geoff. Do you think public opinion has finally admitted that machines can think?
Quite a lot of it, yes. People who use the chatbots, it's very hard for them to live with the story that they're just doing autocomplete and they're just a statistical trick and they don't understand. People who use the chatbots obviously believe that they understand.
Okay, so people are convinced, so they don't think that they are tricks anymore.
I think it's only philosophers and symbolic AI people who just couldn't change their views who believe they don't understand.
Okay, great.
In fact, I had a discussion with a philosopher. I use the example, you say to a chatbot, "I saw the Grand Canyon flying to Chicago." And the chatbot says, "That's nonsense. The Grand Canyon is much too big to fly." And you say, no, no, I meant while I was flying to Chicago, I saw the Grand Canyon. And the chatbot says, oh, I see, I misunderstood. Well, if it was misunderstanding then, what's it doing the rest of the time? And when I said that to a philosopher, they said, oh, there's two kinds of understanding. There's the kind of understanding that people do and the kind of understanding that chatbots do, and that's different kind of understanding. I don't believe it.
Okay. Good. We'll talk about philosophers at the end as well. Okay, you said on some occasions that psychology, your years here at King's College, didn't help you much to answer the question of how the brain worked. You rebelled against this and followed Richard Feynman's motto of what I cannot create, I do not understand. You pursued a career in making machines learn. Do we know how intelligence works better as we are creating more intelligent machines?
I think we do know better. We don't know yet. We don't even know whether the brain does some form of backpropagation. Nobody knows how to implement backpropagation in the brain efficiently. People can have theories about how to implement it, so for small networks you can get pretty much the behavior of backpropagation. But as soon as you make the networks big, we can't get any theory of how the brain could do that. So that's an embarrassing thing. But what we do know is that if you take a neural net, an artificial neural net, and give it lots of data and get the gradient somehow, and just keep updating the gradient based on the data, then it will learn really complicated things. And that's what people didn't believe. That's what symbolic AI thought was nonsense, that you could take a random neural network, give it lots of data, just keep updating it based on the gradient, and it would learn fancy things. And they always said that was nonsense. So we've learned something. That's what the brain's doing. That's what our neural nets are doing. They may be getting the gradient in a different way, though.
So maybe one thing that we have learned, that data is very important.
We have certainly learned that. In fact, the first people to really understand that, I think, were Peter Brown and Bob Mercer at IBM doing machine translation. And Bob Mercer was largely responsible for Brexit. He funded Cambridge Analytica, which used big data from Facebook. And I think without that, maybe we wouldn't have had Brexit. So big data is very important. It's completely screwed Britain.
Okay, there are different kinds of achievements. Okay, on the other hand, and talking about understanding machines, William Thomson, Lord Kelvin, said that when you cannot measure it, when you cannot express it in numbers, your knowledge is of a meager and unsatisfactory kind. We know how learning algorithms work, but we don't really know how big neural networks with trillions of parameters work. So related to the previous question, do you think that mechanistic interpretability, the neuroscience of the artificial, or A evaluation, the psychology of the artificial, they can really answer this question of how they work, especially these massive ones?
Well, we don't know how we work, right? Mechanistic interpretability has got much further than I expected it to get. I spent many, many years looking at the weights in neural networks, trying to understand what's going on. And for the first hidden layer, you can understand what's going on because they have weights to the inputs and you know what the inputs mean. Similarly, for things just before the output, they have weights to the outputs and you know what the outputs mean. If you have a deep net, though, I think it's very hard to really understand what's going on. And I suspect we'll never really understand what's going on when it answers a particular question. Because the real answer to why did it give that answer to that question is, well, it's got these trillion real value weights. And I think it's a bit like a physicist who, if a leaf falls off a tree, the physicist can't tell you where it'll hit the ground. But there's a sense in which they understand what's going on. It's just they'll never be able to predict where a leaf hits the ground. I think we're like that, where the leaf hitting the ground is like, why did it answer that question that way?
So, but then we can predict humans even before opening their brains or scanning their brains. We can predict some behavior, that some human behavior is highly predictable and some other human behavior is not very predictable. So do you think this is going to be the same for machines?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Okay, so the question is, maybe we should only use them in the areas where we can predict what they are going to do.
That's not going to be much use for making scientific discoveries, right?
Okay, okay. No, because if we don't understand them, that's going to be related a little more to the questions at the end about the risks of AI. But you don't put a lot of hope in that we are going to have a full understanding of how intelligence, either natural or artificial, not works, but whether we can predict their behavior.
Well, we're so used to being the apex intelligence that people find it very hard to think of it from the point of view when you're not the apex intelligence. So imagine this conversation between two cats. Because, dogs have owners and cats have staff. And imagine two cats saying, well, when should we use these people? It's quite hard to predict what they'll do. They predictably feed us, but should we use them for anything else when we don't understand how they work? That gives you a new perspective on dealing with super intelligent AI.
Okay, okay. Hope. Your 2018 Turing Award has been somewhat eclipsed by last year's Nobel Prize. But in your Turing Award lecture, you reminded us that artificial neural nets, they don't learn the same way that humans learn. However, recently you said that you are convinced that backpropagation is a better algorithm than the algorithms that we have in the brain, in humans' brains. And of course, both of them are better than some discrete optimization and representation methods based on mutations, something that Turing suggested as a kind of a first approach, or evolution itself as a kind of a very slow method for learning. But is there room for a variety of algorithms in the future, or is a trend towards one family of algorithms to rule them all?
So there's a sense in which backpropagation is doing the right thing. It's finding the gradient and going down it. If you ask what these neural nets are, what optimization problem they're solving, it's somewhat different from the optimization problem we're solving. So we're solving the problem of if you have very many connections, like 100 trillion, so connections are very cheap, because keeping a connection going for a lifetime hardly takes any energy at all. But you don't have much experience, so we only live for 2 billion seconds, so that we have a few billion experiences. How do you do optimization when experience is very expensive and connections are very cheap? Backpropagation is good for solving the opposite problem. How do you learn when you don't have many connections, you only got 1 trillion, and you've got lots of data, you've got trillions of tokens of language, for example. So they're solving somewhat different problems, and that's one reason why you might expect them to be different. I think if the brain could do backpropagation, it would be doing it, though. I just don't think biology has found an efficient way of doing it, but I'm not sure. And it's sort of sad that it's still an open question. Does the brain do some version of backpropagation?
But even in the future, so things are in a way converging into kind of very similar architectures with a different, even of course, in neural networks, different architectures, supervised, unsupervised, even recurrent architectures. They were, and they're still used for some particular things. But in a way, some architectures are becoming really, really powerful to do a lot of things. Do you think that this trend is going to continue, or we're going to see maybe more diversity in the algorithms they use in digital computers only?
I think my guess is that in digital computers, it'll always be based on backpropagation. It'll always be based on just getting the gradient. Yeah. One comment about evolution. Evolution is working in a kind of open system where you don't know all the forces that go into turning a genotype into a phenotype. And so you have to use evolutionary methods. The difference between that and a brain is in the brain has access to all the information required to turn the input into the output. And so it's a known system. And that's why a gradient method is so much more efficient. You can get the gradient, and the gradient is a much better thing to have than just tinkering. But evolution can't get the gradient. And so what evolution did, not being able to get the gradient, was it evolved a brain that could get the gradient.
Yeah, evolution in the way we know it with DNA, which is discrete, but maybe some other kinds of evolution could have been could have used gradient, or maybe there's some kind of a gradient effect in evolution as well. Maybe they are minimal, but yeah. Okay, so going back to Turing, it seems that machine learning using very few principles and lots of tweaks over the years, but no priors, has proven what Turing said of a child's mind: rather little mechanism and lots of blank sheets. Still,
sorry, I want to interrupt. When you say no priors,
okay, go on.
After you've done a bit of learning, that is the prior.
Yeah,
you have very strong priors when you're an undergraduate. You have very strong priors, and you come to things with very strong priors. And so, like 10 years ago, people were comparing tabula rasa neural nets with MIT undergraduates, and the MIT undergraduates could learn things much faster because they have very strong priors. Now the neural nets have the foundation models have strong priors, and the correct comparison is give them a new task in their context, and then they can learn it from few examples.
That was exactly my point, actually. That what I was going to say after this, so that we are not comparing comparable things, so that we should compare trained models such as LLMs with, but in a way you have different stages of children. So the question was, have we already built Turing's child? Is this the LLM, the Turing child? Because once we have, go on.
I think Turing would have been happy with what we built. Yeah, he might wonder a bit about the efficiency of it, the statistical efficiency, but yeah. I mean, it just seems obvious to me now. People sort of whinging, have we really passed the Turing test? This is just stupid. We obviously passed it.
Yeah. But in a way, once you have frozen the weights, you have an LLM, you can do few shot learning, and that was quite impressive, and everybody was impressed that they could do that. And you can say they can do something like what a child can do, but still, even if now they start at this level of an undergraduate Cambridge student, then
I just said MIT. I just said MIT because most of the experiments were done on MIT students. I've got nothing against Cambridge students. I was one.
Okay, good. No, but then we still have this difference in terms of the number of examples, the flexibility. We are getting somewhere, but so maybe Turing would be happy, but do you think that we really have this Turing style today?
I mean, we haven't got it exactly like human intelligence, but we have got something. You can ask it any question and it'll give you an intelligent answer. And really, that was the test.
Okay, talking about testing. Today, almost everybody agrees that the imitation game wasn't meant to be a test. It's a fantastic thought experiment. We've been discussing about that today, but it shouldn't be used for a evaluation as a kind of a metric or. And you talked recently about as a test you improvise about yellow paint fading into white. This was called by some people, it was the Hinton test.
Well, it's actually the Levesque test. Hector Levesque gave me that test. He gave me 3 tests to try out. Hector Levesque is a symbolic AI person who's intellectually honest. And so when it started working, he was amazed. And he kept sending me mail, how could it possibly do this? And then he gave me 3 tests. And the most difficult one was that test, but without the fading. So I took the most difficult one and made it more difficult and showed Hector that it could solve that.
Okay, so if this is just, okay, I didn't know that. That was taken from, I think, so maybe we shouldn't call it the Hinton test anymore. But in general, we have seen a lot of benchmarks. Benchmarks were kind of a main tool for machine learning to progress. And of course, I mentioned ImageNet, but there are many others. And now there are thousands of benchmarks for different things. But do you think that AI benchmarks are enough for evaluating current AI systems? Or do we need to learn a little bit more from psychology?
I haven't really thought about that issue. I think benchmarks are good. In fact, neural nets, a lot of the development of neural nets was because you could measure error scores and then mess with things and see how you can reduce the error. I think having benchmarks for different things is important. So benchmarks for, how long a task can it carry out unaided and things like that. And how does that change with time? I do believe that we're creating alien beings. So I believe that the psychology of these alien beings is very important. I don't have much trust in psychologists, though.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Maybe some professors here, they didn't do a great job.
Well, maybe I could tell you about an experiment I did
Yeah.
when I was an undergraduate in psychology.
Yes, please.
So you had to do an experiment. And my experiment, which I did with another student whose name I've forgotten, was on children between the age of 3 and 5, trying to show that they change to attending more to colour when they're 3, to attending more to shape when they're 5. And the way you do the experiment is you train the children on 3 objects. And the training objects are things like 2 yellow circles and a red circle. And the child has to learn to point out the odd one out. Or you give them 2 yellow circles and a yellow square, and they have to point the odd one out. Once they've learned to point the odd one out, you then give them a yellow circle, a yellow square, and a red circle. So if they're going to use shape, they pick the yellow square, and if they're going to use color, they pick the red circle. And it was all going fine until I gave it to a 5-year-old who happened to be the grandson of J.G. Bernal, who was a famous scientist. And he looked at it and he pointed at the red circle and said, "You painted that one the wrong color." Now, the model that we were testing was a really dumb model. It was that kids' attention gets grabbed by stimulus dimensions. That's how psychologists described it at the time. But kids are agents. They're doing an experiment. They know they're doing an experiment. They wonder what the point of the experiment is. They think they've got the point of the experiment. And then you show them something where their theory of what the experiment is doesn't work, and they think maybe you made a mistake. And can you predict the response? You painted that one the wrong color. Well, now we could take a trained multimodal chatbot and we could train it up on the training examples by showing it these white cards with objects stuck on them and telling it the right answer. And then we could give it a test item. And there is some chance, just a small chance, but some chance that our chatbot would look at it and say, "You painted that one the wrong color." In other words, the real predictions, the real behavior of real children, we're much, much closer to being able to model it. Whereas in 1970, when I did that experiment, there was just no chance that you could have a model that would say you painted that one the wrong color. But now we have a model that might do that.
There's a lot of discussion of using LLMs as human models, people in favor, people against.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move a little bit more to the imitation game, adversarial behavior. And the other day at another event, someone told me that Turing didn't like theater. But in the coffee break, Cambridge professor Sarah Dillon told me that that was wrong. So Turing actually did like theater. So let's do a little bit of theater of imitation. And the imitation game is a thought experiment, a game designed to make the substrate of intelligence not matter. It does not matter whether you're a man or a woman or a machine. A person is a mask. In a classical theater, is the essence of intelligence is our capability to play other roles, to imitate other minds. So with enough data, how good can future intelligence become in imitating each and every one of us, or even all of us at the same time?
Sorry, I didn't really understand the question. How could you imitate all of us at the same time when we all
So
do different
language
things?
models, they're able to, so following with the previous question, LLMs, for instance, they are good at imitating human behavior in some way.
Okay, I see.
But
What you mean is at any one time it imitates one of us, but it can imitate any one of us.
the question is whether they can do that with have information about all of us from our memories and the information that we have made available.
That's sort of what they're doing now, because they read half a document, and from the half document they've read, they understand a lot about who wrote that document, the personality of the person who wrote that document. And then they presumably, in some sense, take on that personality so as to be able to predict the next word. So they have to be able to imitate the personalities of all the different people on the web.
So they are the best actors that we even, in some cases,
in a sense,
better
yes.
than humans as actors.
Yes.
Okay. So, but do you think that by imitating humans, and LLMs are very good at imitating humans, and maybe at earlier stages and in the history of machine learning, imitating human learning. So maybe we try to imitate human, and that question was around today as well. Are we limiting what AI could potentially do?
If that's all it does, maybe we are. Although just by imitating humans, I think you can get much smarter than humans. Many people think that when you train a neural net, it can't do better than the people who produce the training data. And that's nonsense. You can train a neural net and it can do much better than the intelligence that produced the labels it's trained on when you're doing supervised training. So I have a little example I like, which is you take the MNIST data set of handwritten digits, and there's 10 possible answers. So what you do is you corrupt the data set by making half of the answers be wrong. So you take half of the examples and you make it one of the other 9 digits instead of the correct digit. And then you train a neural net on that. And many people think, well, you get like 50% correct because it's 50% correct in the training data. No, you get like 95% correct. You don't get 99% correct. You get like 95% correct. Because the neural net sees structure, and when there's exceptions to that structure, it just, in effect, it thinks they're exceptions. This is why your students can be smarter than you. When you say something intelligent and sensible, your students listen to it and absorb the information. And when you say something daft, they just ignore you. And then they end up smarter than you.
I felt this.
AI is like that. So just on human labeled training data, it can end up much smarter than the people who produce that data.
Okay, let's hope in the first part of the answer, the second part. So you've been maybe in a more extreme way than Turing himself. You've been talking about the argument from disability or consciousness, subjective experience. That you are saying that once that we understand that there's no inner theater, it may be the case that maybe consciousness doesn't play any role, but
I didn't say that. You're putting words in my mouth.
Okay, good.
I didn't say consciousness doesn't play any role.
No,
I believe that people have unconscious processing and conscious processing. That is when they're slowly and deliberately working through something. Like if you're playing a game of chess and you think, if he goes there, I'll go here, and then he'll go there, and oh, whoops. That's conscious deliberative processing, right? As opposed to just looking at the board and saying a knight has to go there, just because it looks like that's the perfect place for a knight. When you're not sort of thinking through the moves ahead, you're just saying that's where knights need to go. And that's okay, so basically unconscious processing.
Then let's talk about embodiment, which is not the same thing. So LLMs are disembodied. They have read everything and watched everything, but they have lived nothing. So they are in Plato's cave.
Hang on. I'm not gonna. I want to put down a marker that I don't completely agree with you saying they have lived nothing. They've lived through trying to predict what all these people said and having conversations with people and.
But that's after, well,
I agree the learning was turned off when they had the conversation. So let's say they've actually lived through trying to predict all this text. Now,
Okay,
you say that's not living, but for them, that's the closest they get
but they are disembodied. Can we agree on that?
at present.
Okay, so then is there anything that a disembodied AI system cannot really do?
Okay, that's a very good question. The old version of this question is, if you put a child in a room with a radio and all they could do was listen to the radio, could they understand how the world worked? And philosophers were very confident the answer was no. I think most of them were. And I think the answer is yes. So there's really two questions here. One is, can they do it efficiently? And then there's a philosophical question, is it possible at all? And I think they can understand a huge amount about the world, including the physical world, just from text. And that's a big surprise. Obviously, it's easier to understand if you have a body and you manipulate things and you can see things and you can feel things. But the philosophical question is, could you really understand 3D space and the structure of the world and how objects feel just from reading text? And I think you could with enough text.
You put an example of multidimensional spaces and how humans can we understand that we haven't lived in a multidimensional, more than 3 dimensions, and yeah, I think that what you mentioned that we can do some tricks for that.
Yes, they're not very good tricks. I mean, the trick is to imagine a 14-dimensional space, you imagine a 3-dimensional space and just keep saying 14 to yourself very loudly.
Okay, let's move a little bit more into the risks of AI. And people in AI safety are talking about LLMs deceiving, scheming, and sandbagging. So Stanislav Lem, in his Futurological Congress, put it like this. A mimicretin is a computer that plays stupid in order once and for all to be left in peace. And these simulators are machines that simply pretend that they are not pretending to be defective. What is more likely? A super intelligent system taking over the world to achieve some stupid paperclip goal, or realizing its goals are stupid?
If it's a super intelligence, I don't think it will fall for turning everything into paper clips. I think it would have enough understanding to realize people gave it the goal of making more paper clips, but they didn't mean that. So I think that's a sort of silly example for a superintelligence. It makes a point that you should be careful what you wish for. But I don't think a superintelligence would do something stupid like that. That's just obviously stupid.
Okay, yeah. No, that was very influential, that example. So it's good to hear that. So Samuel Butler's Erehon, Over the Range, was one of Turing's favorite novels. It presents some of the early ideas of humans being the inferior race compared to the machines, and becoming better by evolution of self-improvement, Darwin among the machines. So let's assume for a moment that we get super intelligent AI right and safe. This would be a Copernican moment. That was this reference to the great chain of being. So if we get there, we basically have to admit that humans are not special at all. But what place do humans have in this new tree of being?
Well, humans are special to other humans, right? Humans are very special to other humans. We're built that way. And since we're humans, I believe that we should do whatever we can to make the world good for humans. So I eat cows. I sort of care a little bit about cows, but not enough not to eat them. Some people care enough not to eat them. But I think we should just recognize that it's people we care about because we're people. And that's the only reason I can think of for not saying that, well, they're smarter than us. Maybe they should just take over.
Okay, let's leave it there. So AGI, talking about superintelligence, is an ill-defined concept, so is superintelligence. It is redefined at the pleasure of big tech. Now it is conceived as involve only purely intellectual tasks, as in the imitation game. We hear AGI, the almighty, will soon cure autism and stop all wars. Yeah, but robots are years away from cleaning our toilets. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not interested in the toilets or being replaced with that task. But will scientists, like many of us, be redundant one day?
Well, a couple of days ago, I was talking to someone I worked with, a very smart graduate student from U of T called Mengyi Ren, who I worked with when he was an intern at Google for a year before he went and got a faculty position at NYU. And he was showing me the latest thing he did. And he then explained that he didn't actually do this with the graduate student. He did it with an AI because it was much easier to get stuff done with an AI. The whole research project took him an hour because it coded up everything for him. He could have done it with a graduate student, but the graduate student would have come back over several weeks. So already for a young professor of AI, he's using chatbots in place of graduate students.
Hope. The research community, especially machine learning.
Let me say one more thing about that. I think graduate students in good research groups are the best source of new ideas, really original ideas. That's where they normally originate. It's still the case that universities are worth having. And so I think for really original ideas, that's graduate students are still going to be very important. But for sort of mundane research, you don't need them anymore.
Okay. So I was talking about machine learning being very much as a discipline, or a community especially, very much in favor of open data, sharing code, replicability, and mechanistic interpretability, in a way, as a discipline, or as a sub-discipline, requires this kind of openness. But in terms of safety, do you think that open weights are a good idea?
So if you're doing research on nuclear bombs and nuclear energy, it'd be very nice to have open source fissile material. You can go and get your fissile, you can order it on the web. That will make research a whole lot easier. But it's not a good idea because the bottleneck for groups producing nuclear weapons, the main bottleneck is getting your hands on fissile material. I think open weights are as stupid as fissile material, but it's too late.
Yeah, it's too late. Yeah, proliferation is guaranteed, someone said.
Yeah.
So if intelligence is, or cognition more generally, is very difficult to test, we were talking about that before. What about AI benevolence or kindness? Do you think that humans will agree on what is beneficial or how to test it?
I haven't really thought about that. I guess yes. It'll be sort of obvious when they're doing beneficial things. Somehow, malevolence is intrinsically deceptive, and benevolence is intrinsically not deceptive. I mean, there's cases of deceptive benevolence, like the good guy in Pride and Prejudice. But deceptive benevolence is not kind of the norm. If you're benevolent, you tend to let people know that you're benevolent. There's no reason for disguising things. So I think there's a difference between benevolence and malevolence in that one tends to be intrinsically deceptive, and that's why you need to do research to see if it's going on. Whereas with benevolence, I think people are quite happy to tell you they did something good. That's why I'm very surprised that nobody's told me they nominated me for the Nobel Prize in Physics. Or maybe I should call it the Turing Award of Physics.
Yes,
I mean,
yes. Okay, one thing that, just finishing with my questions, one thing that I find myself thinking a lot recently is in a future of AI, and that's related to a previous question, kind of opposite of existential risk. I see that kind of a sense of immortality for us. You were talking that there's a mortal computation and immortal computation. Our center's director, Professor Stephen Cave, an expert in immortality, but still mortal, could name many paths to immortality that humanity has concocted over the years. To me, this one is particularly intriguing. Large language models, they read everything, all your papers, all your lectures will be watched, and eventually they will find mistakes or contradictions. They will do all of this in the future, and also hidden pearls that maybe we ignore because we have limited capacity reading all the papers. But so in the future, they will have read everything that we have written and everything that we have disclosed. If we think of ourselves as biological computers rather than digital computers, as in uploading, this is our shortest path to immortality. So,
but it's, I don't believe it. There's lots about us that doesn't show up in what we wrote. I think our knowledge is in our connection strengths, and those connection strengths only have meaning given the particular neurons we have with all their particular quirks and their detailed connectivity pattern. So I don't think you can separate the knowledge from the hardware. So I don't think we can be immortal.
So that not even in a tiny bit or better than our fallible human memories about some other people, which is a way of having some kind of immortality.
Certainly we can have sort of something better than an autobiography. We can have everything they ever wrote put in a large language model. So you can ask some questions and they'll give you the answer that the real person would have given you, usually. But I don't think you've captured everything about the real person.
Okay, so I was going to ask 2 years ago, you said something about philosophers here at Cambridge, but I'm not going to ask that question. So I'm going to move directly to philosophers in the room, of course, non-philosophers as well. So yeah, let's open the floor to some other questions.
Can I just say one thing about philosophers? Philosophers don't mind when you insult them because at least you're paying attention.
Okay, maybe someone wants to reply to that. Questions? Yeah.
And just for Geoff's benefit and everyone joining online, in case you can't hear the laughter in the room, there have been plenty of laughs. So if there's any awkward pauses, it's usually crowds laughing at your responses and comments.
Hi, Geoff. Thanks for great Q&A. I just had a question about one domain of potential superintelligence, namely super persuasion. And this could obviously be a very significant domain in terms of things like manipulation. But one thing I'm still really unclear of is whether persuasion as a skill is like playing Go, where the idea of sort of super persuasion even makes conceptual sense. And I'm curious what your thoughts on this are.
I believe there were experiments more than a year ago now where they compared the ability of a person to persuade someone of something and the ability of an AI, and then it was done with and without access to the person's Facebook page. And what they discovered was a person was still better than an AI if you didn't look at the Facebook page. But if you did look at the Facebook page, the AI could make better use of it. And I think the AI was then better than the person. So I think they will get better than us at persuasion, because I think they'll get better than us at everything like that. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you. I guess I was going to say, yeah, no, that's absolutely great. I mean, I guess the only slight follow-on would be whether you think that is going to be a serious threat vector from superintelligence.
Yes, I think it's going to be very serious for one particular thing. Suppose you have a guy with a big switch, and his instructions are, if it starts looking scary, turn it off. Many people still think of that as the last line of defense. Even smart people like Eric Schmidt seems to think that might work. Well, if you've got a superintelligence that's very good at persuading you, it'll persuade that person. It would be a complete disaster to pull that switch, to turn it off. Just as, so Trump managed to do things without physically doing them. Trump just persuaded people to invade the Capitol, right? He didn't have to invade it himself. He wanted to, but he didn't have to. People did it because he was persuasive. And superintelligence will be like that. It'll be able to get all sorts of stuff done because it's persuasive, including not being turned off.
Geoff, do you think it's possible to have an effective AI philosopher?
Yes, I do. I think they'll get much better than us at everything, including philosophy. I mean, I make these jokes about philosophers, but I think many of the problems we're about to confront are problems that philosophers are the only people who've really thought much about it. Like, what is a being? Are we really creating beings? Is there some big distinction between the things we're creating and animals like us? These are all now kind of urgent questions. I have a kind of, my analogy for it is, it was fine to believe the Earth was flat before you could sail to the edge of it. Things worked pretty well as long as you didn't have too big a country. A flat was a pretty good approximation. You could make maps and it was good. But once you can sail to the edge of it, your beliefs are in terrible trouble. And all the beliefs we have about people and what we are like flat Earth beliefs, because we've never seen beyond the horizon of just people. But now we can. Now we can create things that aren't beings, that aren't people. There's a whole new space of things we can create. And I think our beliefs about what people are will be revealed to be as primitive as flat Earth beliefs.
But do you believe that there's some facet of humanness that is needed to become a philosopher? Or can you emulate?
No. Oh, I don't see, in the long run, I don't see anything about people that machines couldn't emulate. And so, yeah, I don't think having had human experience is essential for being a philosopher.
Gillian?
This is Gillian Tett. I'm the Provost of King's, and thank you for taking part today. My question is this: if you were running Cambridge today, would you embed AI in the undergraduate teaching process or the graduate research process? And I ask that because we're talking later to will.i.am, who is working with Arizona State University to use agentic AI to try and make education more widely available. And I'm curious whether you think that's a good thing or it's whether it's going to simply make our brains redundant.
I think it's a good thing. I've thought more about the issue of using AI in earlier stages of education. And there's a big problem with schools, which is that teachers are often in broadcast mode. And when you're in broadcast mode, what you're doing is you're giving the children answers to questions they didn't just ask. And most children aren't so interested in that. They're interested in pursuing their own interests and getting answers to questions they did just ask. And that's why private tutors work about twice as efficiently as teachers. And obviously AI can make education scale in a way that people can't. We can't all have our own private tutor. With AI, we can have it answering just the questions we're currently interested in, and that's when you learn best. So I love learning from chatbots because I can ask them anything and they will tell me the answer. I think we'd be crazy not to use AI in education because of that fact that they can keep you interested by telling you the answer to the thing you're currently curious about.
Question over there.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, Professor Jimny here. I'm exercise physiologist, but I also touch neurophysiology at the moment. But I wanted to take you back to the field of practice and taking psychology with psychologists and talking about clinicians as well, where you guys do the theory and the psychologists apply it on the field in their clinics. So talking to one of my best friends who's a psychologist and others as well, they said, we only take some of the patients and give them something else. So they substitute their issues with some other issues. And most of the time it works. So my question to you, Geoff, do you think that with the AI, these swapping things would stop one day?
I haven't thought about that issue at all. And I don't off the top of my head have anything sensible to say about that. My first thought is that if when therapists do it, it works, then when AI does it, it'll probably work too. But I haven't got anything intelligent to say about that, sorry.
Do we have questions online? Or maybe that's a question over there? Oh, yeah, yeah.
Hi, thank you for this. It's been really illuminating, really appreciate it. But what I would be interested to understand is you've been talking about how AI, and you've said a couple of times, it will be better than us at most things. And understanding the perspective of, say, the atomic human in that position, the idea that empathy, feeling, emotion, creation and art through pain, through the experiences that we've lived through, do you think that that is an indivisible part? Do you think that that's something that we won't actually be able to achieve? That's that sort of ethereal thing that we call humanness. Because if it's going to be better than us at a lot of things, what about the bridge between true creation and true art and true expression?
Okay. I sort of object to the use of the word true creation. It suggests that I think there's a whole spectrum of creativity. There's little acts which are a little bit creative, and then there's more creative things, and then there's very creative things like general relativity. If you take any standard test of creativity and compare people and AIs score at about the 90th percentile. That's what I remember from several years ago. So it's sort of mundane creativity. They're already better than most people. I don't believe there's this sort of special barrier of true creativity as compared with sort of everyday minor creativity. I think it's sort of fractal. There's creativity happens at many, many different scales, and they can already be quite creative. So let me take one example of something where when you train a big language model, it understands something that most people don't understand. And it probably didn't understand it because it was told it. If I say to you, why is a compost heap like an atom bomb? Now, if you're a physicist, that's fairly obvious. But for most people, it's not obvious. They think compost heap, atom bomb. You know, atom bombs aren't green. They're very different. I asked GPT-4 before it could look on the web. So the early days of GPT-4, when it was just a bunch of frozen weights from up to, I think, April of 2022. Why is a compost heap like an atom bomb? And it said, well, the energy scales are very different and the time scales are very different. But then it went on to talk about chain reactions. And as a compost heap gets hotter, it generates heat faster. And as the atom bomb generates more neutrons, it generates neutrons faster. It understood that. And I think it must have come to that understanding as it was training. And the reason it has to come to that understanding as it's training is because it's squeezing a huge amount of knowledge into only of the order of 1 trillion connections. And to do that, you have to see what's in common to all sorts of apparently disparate bits of knowledge. So you can squeeze the common bit in and then squeeze in the exceptions to the common bit. And that's in general the most efficient way of coding things. Find what they all have in common and code that, and then code up the exceptions to that. And that's what it was doing. So I had this conversation with somebody who said, no, I'll bet you that's on the web. I'll bet you on the web you can find why a compost heap's like an atom bomb. So I said, okay, find it. And he tried for a while and he couldn't. And I take that as definitive proof that it wasn't there, because the guy I was talking to was Sergey Brin.
Yeah.
Hi. I have a very short question. Do you think AI can help us become better people, human? Because as we create it in our own image, it may reflect us, our strengths and flaws back to us, just like parents recognize their some parts, some flaws in themselves, in their children, excuse me, and try to grow from that.
So do you think God wasn't created in our own image? Clearly God was created in our image. It's this old cross man who can be quite kind, but is very mean to you if you do bad things. So I think we have the same problems as we do with any religion. God was created in our image and has a lot of human characteristics. These AIs will be similar.
If they are short, we can take two questions. One there, one there.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick question. So you were mentioning that AI can get better than humans who generated the data for training AIs. What the limits on this better you think are? How much better can they get? Do you have any intuitions on that?
Obviously, if there's a sort of whole realm of intellectual endeavor that humans never touched, we never got that far, then AI, in order to sort of understand that stuff, you'd have thought it had to do its own experiments. It had to interact with the world itself, rather than just learning by imitating people. So I think there are limitations that you get from imitating people. You can get better than the people, but if there's whole sort of domains of expertise people have zero experience with, you have to get involved in that. So in mathematics, it may well be like that. There may be whole huge areas of mathematics that people never touched, and that AIs eventually will propose theorems, try and prove them. They'll keep working like that. They'll discover whole new areas of mathematics. But they have to sort of get experience in that area.
Okay, last question. Yeah.
Thanks. Hi. Yeah. Really, really interesting. And I've got like 50 questions, but I'll ask one of them, which applies to kind of my role in Government Office for Science. Will AI cause a loss of skills such as deep reading, critical memory, or problem solving? And do you think we're going to see a cognitive drift in terms of humanity, the generation which learned without AI and the generation which learned using it? And what skills do you think we'll gain? Are we thinking about that question enough?
The best model I have is pocket calculators. If you ask a kid nowadays, what's 11 times 12? They have to do some thinking. They don't just know it. So that's something we've lost, but it's not a very important thing to have lost. And the pocket calculator will always fill in for you. I think I'm more worried about attention than I am about other cognitive abilities. I think what we're losing is the ability to attend for a long time. We get rewards I mean, the whole internet is set up to give us immediate rewards because that's what holds our attention and gets us looking at the advertisements. And I think it's doing terrible things to our ability to attend. I'm more worried about that than loss of cognitive skills.
Okay, we need to stop here. I would like to finish with Bennett's words, maybe as a kind of a summary of the history of artificial intelligence in these 75 years. Well, if we just said the Turing's imitation game as the start of the history of AI. And he was saying that it is a game, everything is a game. It has to be done artificially, balletically. Otherwise, everything becomes an imitation of reality. Let's thank the audience for your questions, the organization, and of course, Professor Hinton for this great time. Thank you very much.